guys can go ahead and have a seat. Thanks for singing with us.
Hey ladies, if we haven't met, my name is Brianna and I have the incredible privilege of teaching here at The Well. In case you didn't know, we call it the Well Gathering because all throughout the Bible, women gathered at wells. They drew water to replenish their daily needs, and while they were there, they created friendships. And that is exactly our hope here at the Well Gathering. We want to be a place for all of the women in our community to come and draw, to meet with other women and leave spiritually filled up and ready to tackle their everyday lives. Our theme this year is titled Centered, and it is all about seeking center in a spinning world. Because ladies, our world is crazy. As if we don't have enough to worry about, we are constantly being fed messages that we should be worrying about more. Am I doing enough? Am I good enough? Do I have enough? Am I pretty enough? Do I get noticed enough? Or is it even possible to feel caught up with this world, or will I always feel behind? As I was studying our series passage, it was so interesting to me that these same questions were still weighing on people 2,000 years ago. Human nature really has not changed. And Jesus has some life-changing words for us in Matthew 6. And I don't know about you, but I am ready to hear from Jesus himself about how to live my life perfectly centered in the midst of a spinning world.
Can you hear me? I do it every time. I turn it off when I'm singing, and then I totally forget to turn it back on. Thank y'all for coming out. Did y'all enjoy the food trucks? Aren't they great? I love that everyone got time to fellowship. 14 years ago, I wrote a journal entry. I'm going to read a little bit of it for you. It says, "People who live in fear and worry bother me. Can't they just give it up and trust God's plan is always bigger and better than our own? Lord, I know this is a prideful attitude, and I wrongly judge my friends who struggle with fear. Lord, I ask that you would humble me gently. Lord, please make it gentle." Shortly after that, I became pregnant with our second child, the second boy, David, and a thought came in my mind early in the pregnancy that said, something's wrong with this baby. And it spun in my head over and over to the point I didn't really know what to do with this. So I met with some friends and kind of would ask, like, hey, did you ever feel like this when you were pregnant? And none of them had, no one related. I met with, at one of my OB appointments, I said, hey, can I be referred to a specialist just to do a really in-depth ultrasound and just make sure everything was okay, because I keep thinking something's wrong. And she listened to me very lovingly and patiently, and she said, Brianna, there is nothing in any of your blood work, any of the imaging we've done, any ultrasound, nothing that says anything's wrong. I would just recommend you to wait it out and just try to find some peace. And I was like, okay. And I met with one more friend who had 5 kids, and I explained to her how I was feeling, and I said, have you felt this way? And she said, I haven't, but I wonder if maybe the pregnancy hormones might be causing some postpartum or some prenatal anxiety. And that sounded like a good answer. So I went home, and I just couldn't shake it. And so the whole pregnancy, I'm thinking, something's off. I felt fine. I really felt great, but I just felt like something was wrong. And then one night in October, I started having contractions, and 5 minutes apart became 3 minutes apart. And this whole pregnancy, I kept wondering, what is my pediatrician going to tell me when he examines David? And what devastating news is he going to deliver to me? And I went into labor and had him the next morning, and he was just like the sweetest, like quietest, most serene little baby. And you know, we fed him and snuggled him. We sent him off to the nursery, and I was just like on this cloud 9 because he was just beautiful. And our pediatrician came in the next morning, and after he had checked him out, and he said this. I wrote it down. I was in a journaling phase. I wish I could keep it up. I'm not very good. I'm good at like little spurts of journaling, but I have this. And he said, David looks great. He's healthy, breathing great. His heartbeat is great. He does have some funny molding on his head I'm going to watch over the next couple of weeks. But other than that, he's perfect. I smiled and thought, a funny head? I can deal with a funny head. And then I rolled over and took a nap. If you have heard me talk about David before, you may know that his funny head was a condition called craniosynostosis, where the growth plates in his head had fused before he was born. So he essentially didn't have a soft spot. And we were going to have to hand him over to a neurosurgeon when he was 12 weeks old. And I had this, I was like, I knew it. I knew it the whole time. And so it's like this cycle of worry that had begun. Even though I guess that worry was a closed chapter, I couldn't get it to stop. And so then I didn't worry about what was wrong. I worried about something going wrong. And my mind space became such that in the 3 months leading up to his surgery, I knew what he was going to wear to his funeral. Sorry, I didn't think I'd cry about that. I've talked about it before, but that's where my mind was. It was just a cycle of worry. And so we handed him over to the surgeon, and he made it through with total flying colors. And now David's an 8th grader who's growing and healthy and gives the best hugs in the state of Georgia. But in that time, the cycle of worry wouldn't stop, because even after that, I thought I had this worry that came to fruition. And I believe that it was a premonition from the Lord, that he was preparing my heart for a specific journey. Because in the years to come, there were more diagnoses and more surgeries and more therapies that we went through. But my mind wouldn't stop. And so then I thought, well, maybe I heard it wrong. Maybe I wasn't going to lose David. Maybe my kids are going to lose me. And so then after David made it through the surgery and was well, I couldn't stop. My brain wouldn't stop worrying. The anxiety was so real. One day I was driving down the highway, and I saw an 18-wheeler driving on the other side of the highway with a huge grassy median between us. And I thought to myself, what if it swerves and crashes into me? Because I was so convinced that this one worry came true, so now they all are going to come true. My headspace was a mess. And it was that moment that said, something's wrong. Something's wrong with my brain. And so I called my OB, and she made time for me that day. And I went in, and I was just a mess. I was reading, I don't know why. If you're having anxiety, the last thing you should do is read the medical brochures in the doctor's office. And I'm like, oh, it's all wrong, everything. And so I'm waiting, I'm reading stupid brochures. I don't even know why. And I guess it was before the iPhone days. And the nurse calls me back, and she takes me to the room. And I'm sitting there, and I'm really nervous because nobody knew. All of this was in here. Nobody on the outside knew anything was going on. And I was like, I'm going to talk to her. She was a Christian woman. She was in her 60s. She had 5 grown children. She was wise and smart and strong. I loved her. And the nurse said, okay. And she handed me, it looked like a full-size paper towel. And she said, just undress completely and cover yourself with this, and Dr. Van will be in just a minute. And she closed the door. And I'm thinking, I'm already feeling really vulnerable. Do I have to be that vulnerable? I can't for the life of me figure out why I need to be naked for this conversation. And so I'm debating in my head. I'm it's an OB's office. Maybe this is how they do things. So I open the door. I say, hey, ma'am, I just wanted you to be aware that I'm just here to talk about some possible postpartum anxiety. And she's like, oh, I am so sorry. You do not need to undress for that. Okay, good. Okay, I'm glad we're on the same page. And if you are in a cycle of anxiety and worry, I want you to know that you are not alone. My OB that day told me, Brianna, one time after a pregnancy, I struggled with the same thing. And this lady was strong. She was former military. She was tough. And she said, I laid in bed shaking because I was so afraid Jesus was going to come back, take me and my husband, and leave my 5 kids as orphans. That was so real to me. And she said, get a journal, write down when you're having these really unrealistic worries. And then in the light of day, reread them and just look at how your brain is. It's not thinking correctly. You'll be able to see it then. And so I did what she said. And I started some counseling. I started talking to a Christian counselor who could guide me through these emotions. And I just feel like You need to know if God is guiding you to medication or therapy because the anxiety has crossed the threshold of a medical situation. You might need to let his healing come in that way. But if your anxiety and worry doesn't, then it's okay to let his healing come in different ways too. He doesn't have the same prescription for everybody. But Jesus has some really, really good words for us. And I would like to say that God is a God who answers prayers. Because do you remember what I prayed? That God would humble me. Because I didn't understand people who struggled with fear and worry. But he did not answer the part where I asked it to be gentle. It felt about as gentle as the paint shaker behind the Home Depot countertop. But I want you to open up your Bible with me to Matthew 6, verses 25, because Jesus has a wonderful antidote to worry in Matthew 6. And I believe every one of us can use a heaping spoonful of his words. Verse 25, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is life not more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And I love the way the NLT puts verse 25. It says, don't worry about whether you have enough. Because isn't that what worry is? It's focusing on the lack, what we think we're not going to have. Worry is focusing on the lack. And if we want to stop worry, the first thing we have to do is stop focusing on the lack, on the negative, on the gloomy and doomy what-ifs of tomorrow. Because worry is like the ugly twin sister of bitterness. Because while worry focuses on the negative that might come in the future, bitterness focuses on the negative that did go in the past. Both worry and bitterness cycle on the negative, and both of them suck the life right out of us and rob the day of all of its joy, all of its strength, and all of its potential. Both worry and bitterness are just like rabbits and laundry. When we leave them unattended, they multiply quite quickly. I have this wheel here. It's called the Whirl of Fun. But we're going to do something today. We're going to change it from being something fun to being something kind of awful. We're going to change it to the whirl of worry, okay? And I need some group participation in this. I'm not my husband, and this ain't Sunday morning, so y'all can talk back to me, and I need you to yell out some things that you, don't yell on Sunday mornings. He wouldn't like that as much as I would. I want you to yell out, what are some things that we struggle with worrying? What do we worry about? Our kids. Finances. Man, y'all are good. Let me try to help. I heard relationships. That's going to have to be a two-liner. Work. Parents. Siblings. Whoops, say it again. Marriage, good. Time. Ability? All right, we are done. I ain't putting that on my wheel, y'all. When the wheel of worry is constantly spinning, it's almost hypnotizing, like the little cartoon character who got the anvil dropped on its head. Because what will it land on? What bad thing is around the corner? When's the other shoe going to drop? It is nearly impossible to focus when the wheel of worry is spinning and spinning and spinning. Have you ever watched one of your favorite TV shows, and by the end of it, you have no idea what was going on because you were scrolling your phone the whole time? Worry is the exact same way. Even the most pleasurable things are not that enjoyable when we worry. It's like the gifts God has right in front of us. We can't even see them because all we're doing is focusing on what bad thing might happen, what negative thing might happen. And if pleasurable things aren't enjoyable when we worry, what about the pain? Is pain not even greater when we think that it will never end? And if the pain is more painful when we worry, what about our purpose? Have you ever heard anyone say, I do my best work when I am riddled with stress, worry, and negativity? No. I mean, probably the Grinch, but like even he had a change of heart in the end. It doesn't matter whether we are in pleasure, in pain, or in purpose. When we focus on the lack or the negative in this life, it always hinders and it never, ever helps. Let's pick it up in verse 27. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon, in all of his glory, was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? I love that mental image it says in verse 27, the toiling and the spinning. Because that is such a mental image. We think about toiling and spinning. We think about this human effort that feels like we have to control and manipulate everything or it won't turn out our way. It's the most exhausting effort, and it almost always turns out bad when we want to control what's going on rather than trusting God to do it. Earlier this year, I had a sinus surgery, and when I woke up out of anesthesia, I woke up out of anesthesia, and I had this immediate feeling that I could not breathe. And I was panicked, and I looked at the young nurse next to me, and I said, I don't feel like I can breathe. And I started manually taking in these deep breaths, but I couldn't feel like I was catching my breath no matter what I did. And she quickly darted her eyes to my oxygen, and it was 100%. It was perfect. And I asked her, well, why do I feel this way? This is horrible. And she wasn't really sure, but at the same time, an older, more experienced nurse walks by, and she said, oh, sweetie, your lungs are awake. They're working just fine. Your brain just isn't awake to know it yet. I was trying to take in these big, deep breaths, and I was helping nothing. I was only stressing myself out. She said, try to relax, and the anxiousness will go away, and you'll start to feel better. And so I did what she said. It's kind of hard when you feel like you're struggling to breathe, but I got to think about other things. This is not going to work. I got to think about something else. And toiling and spinning are the exact same way. We don't feel like God's awake and working, so we have to make it happen. We have to take the deep breaths, even though our oxygen is 100%. He is working behind the scenes. He is. And when we can wrap our brains around that, it makes such a big difference, because when we're trying to toil and spin and control, if we can't control it, what do? We lay awake thinking about it all night long, as if that is going to solve some sort of problem, but it never, ever does. Max Lucado, really great Christian author and a great man, he has a quote in his book, Anxious for Nothing. It goes like this, and I'd like you to repeat it after me. I hereby resign as ruler of the universe. Doesn't that feel better? God guides us with peace, and our human nature will guide us with worry, emotion, and control. I want to go back up to verse 28. It says, Jesus is talking to anxious people, and he says, look at the what? The birds of the air and the lilies of the field. Birds and flowers. And I don't know about you, but I find it hard to not relax just a little bit when I'm looking at birds and flowers. So I thought, I wonder if there's something to that. I mean, usually there is when Jesus says it. So I was like, I'm going to go to Google, and I'm just going to look up birds and flowers. So I do. And immediately, there is like a plethora of books, of articles, and medical journals about the mental health benefits of bird watching and simply looking at flowers. Can you believe that? Okay, so I'm going to read two quotes. One is from Time Magazine of November of 2022. Said bird watching can lead to an array of mental health benefits, including long-lasting stress relief. The International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health published the following in September of 2021. The psychological benefits of viewing flowers includes alleviating stress, encouraging positive mood states, and stimulating feelings of vigor. As a result, the study's findings showed the potential benefits of seeing flowers with different colors in our daily lives promote positive emotions and reduce negative emotions. 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, if you're feeling anxious, look at the birds and flowers. And here in 2021, 2022, scientists are finding when you're feeling anxious, you should look at birds and flowers. I just loved that. Because when we are looking at birds and flowers, we are able to see something beautiful that man had nothing to do with. Because Jesus didn't say, look at the bird in that cage or the flower in that pot, because those would be totally man's control. Man grew those, but man did not hold up a lamp to the fields and grow lilies, nor did he provide the rain that grew flowers in the fields. Man didn't teach the bird of the air to soar or to swoop. God did that, and man just gets to observe their beauty and lower our stress at the same time. And it's from that mindset that we have temporarily eliminated the negative from our thinking. Because worry and gratitude cannot occupy the same mind or the same heart. It's like saying, I am so hungry, yet so full. Or, man, I am thirsty, I'm also feeling quenched. I don't know, they can't happen. The one is lack, one is provision. And if we want to seriously put worry in its place, we have to stop focusing on the lack, and we have to start noticing the provision. Start noticing the provision. Years ago, I had this fruit bowl on my counter for years. It wasn't this exact one, but it looked almost identical. And it was starting to rot. It was just getting old. And so one day while I was at the grocery store, I picked up a wire basket. And so I put the wire basket down, and I arranged the fruit in it on my counter, and my kids came in. They were small at the time, and they were so excited about this new fruit bowl. They just were like, did you see the fruit bowl? They've never been so excited about any home decor or dish I've bought. And I was like, what is with the fruit bowl? Why are you guys so excited? And my daughter said, because we can see the fruit. I had never realized from their little perspective, they could not see what was inside the bowl. And they loved fruit. They probably knew it was hidden in there, but nothing in them could see what was going on. So when I switched to this, they could see right through the bowl and see exactly what sweet fruit was inside. And that is the kind of perspective shift we need when we're talking about worry and gratitude. We need to put away the wooden bowl, and we need to get the wire basket out so that we can see that there is sweetness inside of everything that God does, that we can see that it is not just maybe there's something in there, but there is something there. I was talking to a friend who is a licensed professional counselor, and we were talking about this exact subject and how that is exactly what counselors try to get people to do when they are in worry, when they are in depression or anxiety, is to start seeing the good and start seeing things to be grateful for. And I just loved, she was sending me articles and reading material that, again, it just proves what Jesus said, that if we want to put worry in its place, we have got to start looking for the provision. I don't know if you've ever watched a buzzard circle above you in the air. They are really ugly, and they circle and they look for something dead to devour, and when they see it, they swoop down with their big, black, ugly shoulders, and they devour the rotting. Versus Have you ever watched a little dove perch itself up on a branch and bob its cute little head looking around for the tiniest seed or grain? And when it finds it, it flutters down and happily enjoys its harvest. A buzzard looks for death. A dove looks for life. One is beautiful to watch, and one is not. And which will we choose? Philippians 4 says this, be thankful. I'm going to paraphrase. Be thankful. Be thankful. He says it twice. It actually says rejoice. I say it again, rejoice. Don't be anxious. Instead, give it to God. Thank him and start looking for the good things around you, and then you'll have peace. I heard a quote a while back, and I wrote it down, and I can't remember for the life of me where I heard it. So if you said it, I'm sorry if I'm not giving it to you, but it went like this. If you want to change your pattern, change your pattern. It's so simple. Sometimes we think, well, one of these days, when everything aligns, when everything is perfect, I'll change my pattern, I'll change my way of thinking when things get better. But we have to learn to change it right where we are. And then no matter if things get better or things get worse, we know how to handle when those thoughts intrude. And one way we can do it is taking our wheel of worry, and instead of worrying about all of these things, we turn it into the whirl of gratitude, or thanks, because the label was really long when I made it for gratitude. And then we learn, instead of worrying about our kids, we learn to be thankful for them. Instead of worrying about our ability, we're thankful for the ability we have. Instead of worrying about our time, we're thankful God gives us tools to manage it well for him. We're thankful the marriage is getting it, and maybe it needs some work, but we're thankful we still have it. We're thankful for our siblings, even though maybe it's a hard relationship. If they're not doing well, we're thankful we have them. Thankful for our parents, for our job, for our relationships, for what health we have, for our finances, and the ability to work, the ability to save, the ability to little by little make them well. We turn our worries into gratitude. And when we get really, really good at finding the provision in life, we don't just put on rose-colored glasses and pretend that we don't see anything bad and that everything we see is just great. It's not fake. It's not a show. But what happens is we get so good at it that then we learn to find the provision even in the lack. I have a friend who went through earth-shattering devastation several years ago when she realized that her husband had been unfaithful in their marriage. And they put in months and years even of very hard work. And they actually got to a place to where their marriage was better than it had ever been. They were better parents, they were better spouses, and they were better people. And at the end of it all, after going through a terrible situation, they let God take them down and build them back up. And she said, I would do it all again to get us to where we are now. She saw the provision in the lack. God can take any broken, hard situation, and he can grow it into something incredibly beautiful. So why do we worry? Do we not think he can do that for us? That even if the worry comes true, can he not make it into something more beautiful than we could have manipulated or controlled ourselves? He is, after all, the God who designed the rose to grow on a shrub of thorns. One of my favorite books, I would say besides the Bible, it is my favorite book. It is The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. And if you are familiar with her, she grew up in Holland, and she was in her 40s and 50s when World War II started. Her and her sister Betsy never married. They still lived at home with their elderly father. And when the Jews on their street started having to wear yellow stars, they realized they were also beginning to vanish. The Nazis had occupied Holland, where they lived. And so they built a room in their house and began hiding Jews. And through this whole situation, Corey, unintentionally but very successfully, became the leader of the entire Dutch underground and successfully saved the lives of 800 Jews and refugees in her time in charge. She is please read the book. She is a powerhouse of a woman. I absolutely love her. And after years of success, somebody had found out and turned them in. And one day, the Nazis invaded their house, and the Jews that were living in their house never got found in the hiding room. They later made it to safety. But Corey, her sister Betsy, and her father were all arrested. And they were taken to prison where their father died 10 days later. And then Corey and Betsy were then taken to a concentration camp in Holland. And from there, they were taken to the notorious Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany. And it was there where cruelty and brutality were totally personified. When they entered in, they got to their barracks, and the barracks next to them was the punishment chambers, and they could hear screams at all hours of the day and the night. It was so overcrowded that 3 women had to share one sleeping space. The sleeping arrangements were platforms of wood stacked up so short they couldn't sit up in them with straw thrown on them. So they get there and they sink down. They've had a 3-day train ride packed standing in a train car with hundreds of other women. And they get there and they arrive to their barracks and they sink down in the straw of their bed and jump up immediately because it is swarming with fleas. And Betsy reminded them of the scripture that they had read that morning in the Bible they had smuggled in with them. And she said, you know what we need to do? And she said, what? She said, we need to stop and pray and give thanks to God. And Corey said, Betsy, what on earth? There is nothing to be thankful for. And she said, no, we need to do it. It said, give thanks in all circumstances. It did not say, give thanks in pleasant circumstances. So we need to give thanks. And Corey said, okay, then I'll let you pray. She couldn't think of anything to be thankful for. And Betsy said, Lord, I thank you that us 2 sisters are at the same camp and in the same barracks and didn't get separated. And Corey said, oh, that is something to be thankful for. And she said, and I thank you that you took our father home and he did not have to endure a concentration camp. And Corey said, yes, that is something to be thankful for. She said, and I thank you that we were able to safely smuggle in this Bible so that we can tell others about you. And yeah, you're right. And she said, and then I'm thankful for the overcrowding of this barracks because more women will hear your life-giving words through this Bible. She said, yeah. And then she said, and Lord, I thank you for the fleas. And Corey said, no, I'm not going there. We're not being thankful for the fleas. Not even God can make me grateful for a flea. And Betsy reminded her, no, we are to give thanks in all circumstances, not just the pleasant circumstances. So from there, with this attitude that they had, they actually started a church in their barracks. They would have it at night with the light of a flickering yellow bulb on the wall. They would whisper hymns, and then they would read from the scriptures. And women began crowding around to the point where they started a concentration camp church. They would read the scriptures, and some would pass it to Dutch, to French, to Polish, to Czech, to Russian, and back to Dutch again. It was going throughout. Women were getting saved. They were coming to know the Lord through this Bible that they safely smuggled in. And even though guards and patrolmen searched every inch of that camp every day, they were never, ever discovered. And one day, they had a confusing matter in the barracks, and someone went to get the supervisor in charge and said, hey, we've got something we need you to come in here and clear some confusion. And the supervisor said, no, I'm not going in. And she said, well, then can you send a guard? And she said, no one's going to go in there. That place is crawling with fleas. The very fleas Betsy had thanked God for months before was the reason that their church was never discovered. And when I get to heaven, one of the questions I have is, how many people are up here because of those fleas. And when we learn to thank God and we find the provision, we stop seeing the lack, we start noticing the provision, and then we start knowing the provision even in the lack, even in the pain, and even in the fleas. Would you pray with me? Jesus, I thank you so much for every single woman in this room. I thank you that you are a God who controls the universe, Lord, and it's not up to us. It is not up to us to control, to manipulate, to stay up all night thinking about it. We can place our biggest worries in your hand, and you work them together for good, because you are only good. And we learn to see your provision through all of the ups and downs of life, through everything we think we lack, through every provision. It's all you, Lord. And we thank you